Karoline Leavitt was having one of those days that seemed to stretch on forever. At just 26 years old, she had already made history as the youngest White House press secretary ever appointed. But right now, all she wanted was to get home and forget about the chaos of Washington politics for a few hours. The week had been brutal. 3 major press conferences, countless meetings with senior officials, and a media storm that seemed to grow larger by the hour. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters, advisors, and government officials, each one demanding her immediate attention. The weight of representing the most powerful office in the world sat heavy on her young shoulders. Boston Logan Airport was packed as usual, with travelers rushing in every direction. Karoline pulled her baseball cap low over her face, hoping to avoid recognition. The last thing she needed was another impromptu interview or photo opportunity. She just wanted to blend into the crowd and disappear for a while. Her flight had been delayed by an hour, which meant she had time to kill. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she had skipped lunch again. Politics had a way of making you forget basic human needs like eating and sleeping. She spotted a small cafe tucked between 2 gate areas and decided to grab something quick. The line was longer than expected, filled with tired business travelers and families trying to manage restless children. Karoline found herself checking her phone every few seconds, scrolling through news alerts and social media updates. Even on her day off, she couldn't completely disconnect from the political world that had consumed her life. When she finally reached the counter, she ordered her usual, a large coffee with extra cream and a blueberry muffin. The caffeine had become her best friend during these exhausting weeks in Washington. As she waited for her order, she noticed how normal everyone looked. Regular people living regular lives, completely unaware of the political dramas playing out behind closed doors. Her coffee was ready and she grabbed it eagerly, already imagining that first perfect sip. But as she turned to find a seat, disaster struck. She collided directly with someone walking past and her hot coffee went flying through the air like a brown waterfall. "Oh no, no, no," Karoline gasped, watching in horror as her coffee splashed across a young girl who couldn't have been more than 14 years old. The liquid soaked into what appeared to be a notebook the girl was carrying, and Karoline's heart sank as she saw pages filled with what looked like important work. The girl stood there for a moment, completely still, as coffee dripped from her clothes and notebook. Karoline expected tears, anger, or at least some kind of typical teenage reaction. Instead, the girl looked up with the strangest expression, not upset, not surprised, but almost like she had been expecting this exact thing to happen. "I am so sorry," Karoline said, frantically grabbing napkins from nearby tables. "Let me help you clean this up. I'll pay for your clothes, your notebook, whatever you need. I'm such a mess today." But the girl just stood there, studying Karoline, with intense dark eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. She had long black hair and wore simple clothes, jeans and a plain sweater that now had coffee stains spreading across the front. What struck Karoline most was how calm she seemed about the whole situation. "It's okay," the girl said quietly, her voice carrying an odd confidence that didn't match her age. Actually, this was supposed to happen. Karoline stopped dabbing at the coffee stains and looked up. "What do you mean, supposed to happen? I just completely ruined your notebook and probably your clothes too." The girl held up her wet notebook, and Karoline could see pages covered with complex diagrams and equations that looked like advanced mathematics or physics. Some of the ink had smeared, but most of it was still readable. What she could see made absolutely no sense to her. Symbols and formulas that looked like they belonged in a university textbook, not in the hands of a middle school student. "Ms. Leavitt," the girl said calmly, "the collision was inevitable. Your path and mine were always going to cross at exactly this moment, in exactly this way." Karoline felt a chill run down her spine. How did this random teenager know her name? She had been careful to keep her identity hidden, wearing casual clothes and a baseball cap. Unless someone had recognized her face, there was no way this girl should know who she was. "How do you know my name?" Karoline asked, taking a step back. Her mind immediately went to security concerns. Was this some kind of setup? Was she being followed? In her position, paranoia was a survival skill. The girl smiled slightly, the first real emotion she had shown since the collision. I know a lot of things, Ms. Leavitt. I know you've been struggling with the climate change briefing you have to give next Tuesday. I know you stayed up until 3 in the morning last night trying to figure out how to explain carbon emissions in a way that won't put people to sleep. Now Karoline was genuinely frightened. Those details weren't public knowledge. Her late-night work sessions were private, and the climate briefing was still in early planning stages. Only a handful of people in the White House knew about it. "Who are you?" Karoline whispered, looking around to see if anyone else was watching this strange conversation. "Are you recording this? Is this some kind of journalism project?" The girl laughed softly, a sound that somehow made her seem even more mysterious. "I'm not a reporter, and I'm definitely not recording anything. I'm just someone who sees patterns that other people miss. And right now, I can see that you're about to make a decision that will change both of our lives." She gestured toward an empty table near the window. "Why don't we sit down? I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say. And don't worry about the coffee. I brought 3 notebooks today because I knew one of them was going to get ruined." Karoline stood there, torn between walking away and satisfying her curiosity. Every instinct told her this was weird and potentially dangerous. But something about the girl's calm confidence was magnetic. In a world where everyone seemed to be shouting and demanding attention, here was someone who spoke quietly and still commanded the room. Against her better judgment, Karoline found herself following the girl to the table. As they sat down, she noticed other travelers glancing their way, probably wondering why a grown woman was having such an intense conversation with a teenager in the middle of an airport. "Before we go any further," Karoline said, trying to regain some control of the situation, "I need to know who you are and how you know so much about my work." The girl opened her damaged notebook to a page filled with equations and diagrams. Even with coffee stains, Karoline could see that this wasn't typical homework. This looked like the kind of advanced theoretical work that graduate students struggled with. "My name is Luna Chen," the girl said simply. "And as for how I know about your work, that's a much longer story. But I can tell you this. I've been following your career for 2 years, not because I'm a fan of politics, but because I knew this moment was coming. I knew we would meet, and I knew it would happen exactly like this." Karoline felt like she had stepped into some kind of alternate reality, where teenagers could predict the future, and coffee shop accidents were part of some grand plan. Nothing about this made sense, but she found herself leaning forward, desperate, to understand what was happening. "That's impossible," she said. "You can't predict random accidents." Luna smiled again, that same mysterious expression that made her look far older than her years. "Ms. Leavitt, what if I told you that very few things in life are actually random? What if most of what we call coincidence is just patterns we haven't learned to see yet?" Karoline stared at Luna across the small airport table, trying to process what she had just heard. The coffee stains on the girl's notebook seemed to mock her, reminding her that this bizarre encounter had started with her own clumsiness. But now sitting face to face with this mysterious teenager, she felt like she had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple accident. "Patterns that we haven't learned to see yet?" Karoline repeated slowly. "That sounds like something a fortune teller would say, not a kid who should be worried about homework and friend drama." Luna opened her notebook to a fresh page, one that hadn't been damaged by the coffee spill. Karoline watched as the girl began sketching what looked like a complex diagram, her pen moving with the confidence of someone who had drawn these shapes 1,000 times before. "Tell me about your biggest challenge at work right now," Luna said without looking up from her drawing. "Not the climate briefing. I already know about that. I'm talking about the thing that keeps you awake at night, the problem that none of you. Your advisors seem to understand." Karoline felt her guard go up immediately. This was exactly the kind of conversation she had been trained never to have with strangers, especially not with random people in airports. Confidential information was sacred in her world, and sharing government business with unauthorized individuals was career suicide. "I can't discuss classified information with you," she said firmly. "I don't care how much you think you know about me or my job. There are rules I have to follow." Luna looked up from her notebook and smiled. I'm not asking for classified information. Ms. Leavitt, I'm asking about the human side of your job. The part where you have to take complex ideas and make them simple enough for regular people to understand. The part where you lie awake wondering if you're doing more harm than good. The accuracy of that statement hit Karoline like a punch to the stomach. She had never admitted it out loud, but that was exactly what kept her up at night. The constant fear that her words might be misunderstood, that her explanations might make things worse instead of better. It was the kind of deep personal worry that she had never shared with anyone. How could you possibly know that? Karoline whispered. Because it's written all over your face, Luna replied, still sketching. And because it's the same challenge that every person in your position has faced throughout history. The gap between what experts know and what regular people can understand gets bigger every year, and you're stuck in the middle trying to build bridges. Luna turned her notebook around so Karoline could see what she had been drawing. It wasn't just random doodles. It was a detailed map of interconnected circles and arrows with words written inside each shape. At the center was a circle labeled Truth, surrounded by other circles with labels like Public Understanding, Media Interpretation, and Political Pressure. This is what your job actually looks like, Luna explained, pointing to different parts of the diagram. You start with truth in the center, but by the time it reaches the public, it has to pass through all these filters. Each one changes the message a little bit until what people hear might be completely different from what you intended to say. Karoline studied the diagram more closely. It was like looking at a blueprint of her daily struggles, drawn by someone who understood the impossible position she found herself in every single day. The accuracy was unsettling, but also oddly comforting. Finally, someone seemed to get it. This is actually pretty good, she admitted reluctantly. But diagrams are easy. Anyone can draw circles and arrows. The hard part is figuring out what to do about it. Luna flipped to another page in her notebook, this one covered with what looked like mathematical equations mixed with words and phrases. Karoline recognized some political terms scattered throughout the formulas, but the overall structure was completely foreign to her. What if I told you there was a way to predict how people will react to your messages before you deliver them? Luna asked. What if you could know in advance which words will create understanding and which ones will cause confusion or anger? That's impossible, Karoline said automatically. Human behavior isn't that predictable. People are complicated, emotional, unpredictable. You can't just plug them into a math equation. Luna's eyes lit up with excitement like a teacher whose student had just asked exactly the right question. That's what everyone thinks, but it's not true. People like to believe they're unique and unpredictable, but we're actually very predictable when you look at large groups. Individual humans are chaos, but human crowds follow patterns as reliable as weather systems. She began pointing to different parts of her equation-filled page. See this section here? This predicts how quickly a news story will spread based on its emotional content. And this part calculates how many people will actually change their minds versus how many will just become more entrenched in their existing beliefs. Karoline felt a mix of fascination and skepticism. The concept was intriguing, but it sounded too good to be true. Even if that's possible, how would a 14-year-old girl figure it out? This kind of research would take teams of experts years to develop. I'm not exactly a typical 14-year-old, Luna said with a slight smile. I've been working on these models since I was 10, and I didn't figure it out alone. I had help from someone very special. There was something in Luna's voice when she mentioned this mysterious helper, a note of sadness that made Karoline curious. But before she could ask about it, Luna continued with her explanation. Let me prove it to you, Luna said, grabbing a clean napkin from the table. Give me a current political issue, something that's been in the news lately. Nothing classified, just something the public is talking about. Karoline thought for a moment. Infrastructure spending. There's been a lot of debate about road and bridge repairs. Luna began writing on the napkin, her handwriting small and precise. Okay, if you frame it as investing in America's future, you'll get about 65% positive response from people under 40, but only 30% from people over 60. If you call it fixing our crumbling roads, you'll get the opposite. Older people will support it, but younger people will think it's boring. She continued writing, filling the napkin with percentages and demographic breakdowns. But if you say creating jobs while making our daily commutes safer, you hit emotional triggers that work across all age groups. Job creation appeals to economic anxiety, safety appeals to parental instincts, and daily commutes are something everyone can relate to. Karoline stared at the napkin covered in Luna's neat handwriting. The analysis was incredibly detailed and, based on her own experience, with public messaging surprisingly accurate. She had seen similar demographic splits in focus group results, but those had taken weeks of research and thousands of dollars to produce. This is either brilliant or completely made up, Karoline said slowly. How do I know you're not just guessing? Luna pulled out her phone and began typing rapidly. Within seconds, she had pulled up news articles and social media posts about infrastructure spending from the past month. She scrolled through comments and reactions, pointing out patterns that matched her predictions exactly. Look at the age demographics of people sharing positive versus negative reactions, Luna said, holding up her phone. Look at which phrases get the most engagement. It's all exactly what the equations predicted. Karoline felt a chill run through her body. This wasn't just lucky guessing. Luna was demonstrating a level of insight into human behavior that professional political consultants would kill for, and she was doing it casually in an airport cafe like it was the most natural thing in the world. Who taught you this? Karoline asked quietly. And why are you showing it to me? Luna's expression changed when Karoline asked about who had taught her. The confident, almost playful demeanor that had defined their conversation suddenly shifted into something deeper and more vulnerable. For the first time since they had met, Luna looked her age, just a teenager carrying a weight too heavy for her young shoulders. My grandmother taught me, Luna said quietly, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee-stained notebook. Dr. Helena Chen. She was a theoretical physicist who worked on some pretty amazing projects back in her day. But more than that, she was the only person who ever believed that my brain worked differently than other kids. Karoline noticed the past tense immediately. Was? She passed away 6 months ago, Luna replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, but in the end, even her brilliant mind couldn't outsmart biology. The pain in Luna's voice was raw and real, cutting through all the mystery and intellectual bravado of their previous conversation. Karoline felt her heart soften as she recognized the grief that Luna was carrying. Losing someone that important, especially at such a young age, was devastating in ways that most people couldn't understand. I'm so sorry, Karoline said genuinely. She must have been an incredible person to raise someone like you. Luna managed a small smile. She was everything to me. My parents died in a car accident when I was 7, and Grandma Helena took me in without hesitation. But she didn't just give me a home, she gave me purpose. She was the first person to realize that my brain wasn't broken, it was just different. Different how? Karoline asked, gently. Luna opened her notebook to a page filled with what looked like family photos taped between mathematical equations. Karoline could see a younger Luna standing next to an elegant older woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. When I was little, other kids thought I was weird because I could see patterns in everything, Luna explained. I would get upset in grocery stores because I could predict which checkout lines would move fastest based on the body language of the cashiers and the shopping cart contents of each customer. I could tell when my teachers were going to have bad days before they even walked into the classroom. She pointed to one of the photos showing her grandmother working at a chalkboard covered in complex equations. Grandma Helena was the only one who didn't try to make me normal. Instead, she taught me how to understand what I was seeing. She showed me that pattern recognition wasn't a weird quirk. It was a superpower, if I learned how to use it properly. Karoline found herself leaning forward, completely absorbed in Luna's story. So she taught you mathematics and physics? She taught me how to think, Luna corrected. The math and physics were just tools. She showed me that human behavior follows the same kinds of patterns as everything else in the universe. Weather systems, economic markets, political movements, social trends, they're all connected by invisible threads that most people can't see. Luna flipped through several pages of her notebook, showing Karoline glimpses of diagrams and equations that grew progressively more complex. Some pages looked like they belonged in advanced textbooks, while others resembled abstract art with their flowing curves and interconnected shapes. By the time I was 10, I was solving problems that had stumped her graduate students, Luna continued. Not because I was trying to show off, but because the solutions just seemed obvious to me. It was like looking at a jigsaw puzzle where everyone else could only see individual pieces, but I could see the complete picture. That's incredible, Karoline said, meaning it. But also incredibly isolating, I imagine. Luna nodded sadly. That's exactly what it was. Grandma Helena understood, but she was the only one. Other kids my age were interested in social media and pop music, while I was fascinated by the mathematical patterns in social media algorithms and the psychological reasons why certain songs become popular. She turned to a page that showed what appeared to be a timeline with various events marked along it. Karoline could see dates and brief descriptions, but the handwriting was too small to read clearly. About 3 years ago, I started applying my pattern recognition to current events, Luna explained. I would take news stories and try to predict what would happen next based on historical patterns and human behavior models. At first, it was just a game to keep my mind busy. How accurate were your predictions? Karoline asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Scary accurate, Luna admitted. I predicted the outcome of the last 3 major elections with 97% precision. I forecasted the stock market crash of 2023 6 months before it happened. I even predicted which celebrities would get caught in scandals based on their public behavior patterns. Karoline felt her mouth drop open. The stock market crash Luna mentioned had blindsided financial experts around the world. The idea that a teenager had seen it coming months in advance was almost impossible to believe. I kept detailed records of everything, Luna continued, flipping to a section of her notebook filled with newspaper clippings and printed screenshots. Grandma Helena insisted on documentation. She said that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The evidence was overwhelming. Page after page of predictions with dates, followed by news articles confirming that Luna's forecasts had come true. Political upheavals, economic shifts, social movements, all predicted with mathematical precision by a girl who wasn't even old enough to drive. This is unbelievable, Karoline whispered, scanning through the documented predictions. If this is real, you could revolutionize everything: politics, economics, social policy. You could help prevent disasters before they happen. Luna's expression grew serious again. That's exactly what Grandma Helena said. In her final months, she made me promise that I wouldn't waste these abilities. She said the world was facing challenges that traditional thinking couldn't solve, and that maybe someone with a different kind of mind could make a difference. Is that why you're here talking to me? Karoline asked. Because you think I can help you use these abilities? Partly, Luna admitted, but it's more complicated than that. You see, about 2 years ago, I started tracking the career trajectories of young political figures who seemed genuinely interested in making positive change rather than just accumulating power. She pulled out a folder from her backpack and opened it to reveal what looked like detailed profiles of various political figures, complete with photos, biographical information, and complex charts tracking their career paths. You were at the top of my list, Luna said, pointing to a comprehensive file with Karoline's photo paper clipped to the front. Not because you're perfect, but because your behavioral patterns suggested someone who would be willing to listen to unconventional ideas if they could help people. Karoline stared at her own file, feeling a mix of flattery and unease. The level of detail was impressive and slightly frightening. Luna had tracked her voting record, her public statements, her career progression, even her personal interests and hobbies. You've been studying me for 2 years? Karoline asked. Studying everyone on my list, Luna corrected. But you were always the most promising candidate. Your pattern suggested someone who would reach a critical decision point around this time in your career, a moment where you would either choose the safe, conventional path or risk everything to try something completely different. Luna closed the folder and looked directly into Karoline's eyes. That moment is coming very soon, Ms. Leavitt. In fact, according to my calculations, it should happen in exactly 127 days. The specific precision of that number sent chills down Karoline's spine. Everything about this conversation felt surreal, but the documentation Luna had shown her was too detailed and accurate to dismiss as fantasy. What kind of decision? Karoline asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Luna smiled mysteriously, that same expression that had started this entire conversation. The kind that will either make you the most influential political figure of your generation or end your career permanently. And unfortunately, the traditional playbook won't help you make the right choice. Karoline sat back in her chair trying to process everything Luna had just told her. The idea that this teenager had been tracking her career for 2 years was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. But what bothered her more was the certainty in Luna's voice when she mentioned the upcoming decision that could make or break her future. 127 days, Karoline repeated slowly. That's awfully specific for something that hasn't happened yet. Luna nodded, opening her notebook to a page covered with what looked like a calendar grid filled with tiny numbers and symbols. Time isn't as mysterious as people think. It's just another pattern like everything else. When you understand the underlying forces that drive human behavior, you can map out future events with reasonable accuracy. Reasonable accuracy? Karoline challenged. You're talking about predicting the future with mathematical precision. That's not reasonable. That's impossible. Is it? Luna asked, raising an eyebrow. Let me prove it to you right now. Give me a scenario, something complex and political, that requires multiple decision makers and public reaction. Make it hypothetical if you want, but make it realistic. Karoline thought for a moment, then decided to test Luna with something that felt safe but challenging. Okay, here's a scenario. Imagine there's a major cyber attack on the power grid that affects 3 states. It happens on a Friday afternoon right before a holiday weekend. The attack is traced back to a foreign country, but we're not sure if it was their government or just criminals operating from their territory. How would you handle the public response? Luna's eyes lit up with interest, and she immediately began sketching on a fresh page of her notebook. Her pen moved quickly, creating what looked like a flowchart with multiple branches and decision points. First question, Luna said without looking up from her drawing. What's the political climate like? Are we in an election year? And if so, how close to the election? Are there any ongoing tensions with the country where the attack originated? Karoline was impressed by the immediate focus on context. Let's say it's 8 months before a presidential election, and there have been some trade disputes with the country in question, but nothing too serious. Luna continued drawing, adding more branches to her flowchart. Second question, what time on Friday does this happen? Rush hour when people are trying to get home, or later in the evening when they're already settled in for the weekend? 4:30 in the afternoon, Karoline said, getting into the scenario, right when everyone's trying to leave work. Perfect, Luna said, now writing rapidly alongside her diagrams. Here's what happens if you follow the traditional government response playbook. You'll hold a press conference within 6 hours, probably around 10:30 Friday night. You'll say something like, "We're investigating the incident and the safety of American citizens is our top priority." You'll avoid naming the foreign country until you have more proof. She looked up at Karoline. How close am I so far? Karoline felt a chill run through her. That was exactly how these situations typically played out, down to the timing and the generic language they always used. That's pretty much exactly what we would do. And here's why it won't work, Luna continued, turning her notebook so Karoline could see the flowchart. By 10:30 Friday night, social media will already be full of speculation and conspiracy theories. People will be angry that they lost power right before a holiday weekend, and they'll want someone to blame. Your careful diplomatic language will make you look weak and unprepared. Luna pointed to different branches of her flowchart, each one labeled with percentages and predicted outcomes. If you don't name the country, 73% of people will assume you're hiding something. If you do name the country without solid proof, 48% will think you're rushing to judgment. Either way, your approval ratings dropped by at least 12 points within a week. The level of detail was staggering. Luna had created what essentially amounted to a complete crisis management strategy, complete with public opinion polling predictions, all in the span of about 10 minutes. "Okay," Karoline said, trying to keep the skepticism in her voice even though she was genuinely impressed. "So what would you do differently?" Luna flipped to a new page and began drawing again. "You hold the press conference at 7 p.m. Friday, not 10:30. That's early enough to catch the evening news cycle, but late enough to show you took time to gather facts. You acknowledge people's frustration about losing power during their weekend plans. That shows you understand their daily lives, not just the political implications." She continued writing and drawing as she talked. "You name the country, but you frame it as criminals operating from X country rather than X country attacked us. That gives their government a face-saving way to cooperate without looking like they're admitting guilt. And here's the key part. You announce immediate emergency assistance for affected families, like temporary housing vouchers for people whose homes got too hot or cold." "Emergency assistance?" Karoline questioned. "For a power outage?" "That's exactly the reaction I expected," Luna said with a smile. "But think about it from a human perspective. Some of those people have elderly parents who need air conditioning for their medications. Some have small children who need consistent temperatures. Some run small businesses that lost a whole day of revenue. When you offer concrete help for real problems, people remember that you care about them as individuals, not just as voters." Karoline found herself nodding along. It was a completely different approach from anything she had learned in her political training, but it made sense from a human perspective. "The result," Luna continued, showing her the predicted outcome branches of her alternative flowchart, "is that 79% of people see you as responsive and caring. Your approval ratings actually go up by 6 points, and the foreign country's government actively helps track down the criminals because you gave them a way to be part of the solution instead of just the target of blame." "That's incredibly detailed," Karoline admitted. "But how do I know these aren't just educated guesses? How do I know your percentages and predictions are real?" Luna reached into her backpack and pulled out what looked like a sealed envelope. It was slightly yellowed and had clearly been sitting around for a while. Across the front, in Luna's neat handwriting, was a date from 6 months earlier and the words, "For Karoline Leavitt, Airport Encounter Proof." "Open it," Luna said simply. Karoline took the envelope with shaking hands. The seal was intact and the paper felt old enough to have actually been written months ago. She tore it open carefully and found several pages of handwritten notes inside. The first page made her gasp out loud. It contained a detailed description of their entire conversation, from the coffee spill to the political scenario they had just discussed. But it wasn't just the general outline. It included specific phrases they had used, the exact timing of events, even the fact that Luna would be wearing a coffee-stained sweater. "This is impossible," Karoline whispered, flipping through the pages. "You wrote down our entire conversation 6 months before it happened." "Keep reading," Luna said quietly. The next pages contained predictions about Karoline's recent work assignments, including details about meetings and decisions that had happened just days ago. Things that no one outside the White House could have known about, written in an envelope that had clearly been sealed for months. But the final page was what really took Karoline's breath away. It contained a detailed description of a crisis that would hit her administration in exactly 127 days, complete with the specific decisions she would need to make and the consequences of each choice. "How is this possible?" Karoline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luna's expression was serious now, all traces of her earlier playfulness gone. "Because patterns repeat themselves throughout history, Ms. Leavitt. The same types of people make the same types of decisions when faced with the same types of pressures. Once you understand the patterns, the future becomes as predictable as the past." She leaned forward across the table. "But here's the thing about patterns. They can be broken. That's why I'm here talking to you today. In 127 days, you're going to face a choice that every person in your position has faced throughout history, and every single one of them has made the same mistake." "What mistake?" Karoline asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Luna smiled sadly. They chose to protect their careers instead of protecting the truth. And every single time it destroyed both. Karoline couldn't sleep for 3 days after her encounter with Luna. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those handwritten pages predicting their conversation with impossible accuracy. The sealed envelope sat on her nightstand like a ticking bomb, reminding her that someone had mapped out her future with mathematical precision. She tried to convince herself it was all an elaborate hoax. Maybe Luna was some kind of government plant testing her security awareness. Maybe it was a setup by political opponents trying to make her look crazy. But deep down, she knew what she had experienced was real. The level of detail, the emotional authenticity of Luna's story about her grandmother, the way everything had unfolded exactly as predicted. It was too complex and too personal to be fake. Work became almost impossible to focus on. During meetings with senior staff, Karoline found herself thinking about Luna's pattern recognition theories. When reviewing polling data, she remembered the teenager's explanation of how human behavior followed predictable mathematical models. Every press briefing felt different now, knowing that someone could potentially calculate the public's reaction before she even spoke. The climate change presentation that Luna had mentioned became Karoline's testing ground. Instead of using the traditional approach of statistics and dire warnings, she tried incorporating some of Luna's ideas about emotional connection and personal relevance. She talked about families worrying about their children's future, about farmers struggling with unpredictable weather patterns, about coastal communities watching their neighborhoods slowly disappear. The response was unlike anything she had experienced in her political career. Normally, climate briefings generated polite but disengaged questions from reporters. This time, the room felt electric. Journalists asked follow-up questions that showed genuine interest rather than just professional obligation. Social media. Reactions were overwhelmingly positive, even from people who typically criticized every government statement. Her approval ratings jumped 8 points overnight. "I don't understand what you did differently," her chief advisor told her after reviewing the polling data. "But whatever it was, do it again." Karoline wanted to explain about Luna and the mathematical models of human behavior, but she knew how crazy it would sound. Instead, she simply said she had tried a more personal approach to the messaging. Her team assumed she had gotten lucky, or finally hit her stride as a communicator. As the weeks passed, Karoline found herself thinking more and more about the final page of Luna's letter, the one describing the crisis that would arrive in exactly 127 days. She had memorized every word, every detail about the impossible choice she would supposedly face. The more she thought about it, the more terrified she became, but she was also curious. Luna had left her a phone number, writing that it would only work when the moment arrived. Karoline had tried calling it several times out of curiosity, but it always went straight to a disconnected number message. Either Luna was incredibly disciplined about when she answered her phone, or she somehow had the technology to make the number only work at specific times. Day 126 arrived on a Tuesday morning that seemed perfectly ordinary. Karoline woke up, had her usual coffee and bagel, and reviewed her schedule for the day. 3 routine meetings, a photo opportunity with visiting students, and preparation for the next day's press conference about new infrastructure funding. She almost forgot about Luna's prediction until her phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. "Ms. Leavitt, we have a situation," her security chief said, his voice tight with tension. "You need to get to the secure briefing room immediately." Karoline's blood ran cold. She grabbed Luna's letter from her desk drawer, where she had been keeping it hidden, and quickly flipped to the final page. According to the prediction, the crisis would begin at exactly 2:45 p.m. on day 127, when she would receive an urgent call about a developing situation. She was 2 minutes late, but otherwise, Luna had been perfect. Tiwi. Briefing room was packed with grim-faced officials from various departments. On the main screen was a news report showing what appeared to be a massive industrial accident at a chemical plant in Ohio. Thick, dark smoke billowed into the sky while emergency vehicles raced toward the scene. Initial reports suggest an explosion in the main processing facility, the emergency management director explained. We're looking at potential contamination of the local water supply, possible evacuations of up to 50,000 people, and early indications that safety protocols may have been deliberately ignored. Karoline's heart sank as she recognized the scenario from Luna's letter. Every detail matched: the location, the type of accident, even the estimated number of people affected. But the real test was still coming. "There's more," the FBI representative added. "We've discovered that the plant's parent company has been making significant donations to the current administration. If it comes out that we knew about safety violations and didn't act, this could become a major scandal." There it was, the impossible choice that Luna had written about 6 months earlier. Karoline could protect the administration by downplaying the safety violations and focusing on the accident as an unfortunate industrial mishap. It would preserve political relationships and avoid a damaging scandal. But it would also mean covering up negligence that had put thousands of people at risk. Or she could tell the complete truth, expose the safety violations and political connections, and watch her career implode as powerful interests turned against her. Luna's letter had been clear about what typically happened in these situations. Throughout history, press secretaries faced with similar choices had almost always chosen political survival over transparency. And every single time, both the cover-up and their careers had eventually been destroyed anyway, usually leaving them with nothing but regret. "We need a unified message," her chief of staff said. "Something that acknowledges the tragedy without getting into the political complications. Standard crisis management protocol." Karoline looked around the room at the faces of people she had worked with for months. Good people, most of them, but people who were trained to think in terms of damage control and political consequences rather than human impact. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number Luna had given her. This time, it rang. "I was wondering when you would call," Luna's familiar voice said after the first ring. "You're looking at the news reports right now, aren't you?" "How did you know this would happen?" Karoline asked quietly, stepping away from the group of officials. "Because it's happened before in different forms with different details but the same basic pattern," Luna replied. "Powerful interests take shortcuts that put people at risk. Something goes wrong, and then the people in charge have to choose between protecting the powerful or protecting the truth." "What should I do?" Karoline whispered. "I can't make that choice for you," Luna said. "But I can tell you what will happen with each option. If you follow the traditional playbook and downplay the safety violations, you'll avoid immediate political damage. Your approval ratings will stay stable for about 6 weeks. But investigative reporters will eventually uncover the connections, and when they do, the cover-up will be worse than the original problem. Your career will end, the administration will be damaged anyway, and nothing will change to prevent similar accidents in the future." Karoline closed her eyes, already knowing what Luna would say about the alternative. "If you tell the complete truth right now, today, your approval ratings will drop 15 points immediately. Several powerful people will become your enemies. Your job will become much more difficult, and you might not survive politically." "That doesn't sound like a better option," Karoline said. "But," Luna continued, "something interesting happens about 3 months later. The public starts to trust you in a way they've never trusted a government official before. Your honesty during this crisis becomes a model for how other situations should be handled. You don't just survive politically, you become the most influential voice in your administration, and most importantly, real changes get made to prevent future accidents." Karoline looked back at the room full of officials waiting for her decision. "You're asking me to risk everything on your mathematical models." "I'm not asking you to do anything," Luna replied gently. "I'm just giving you information that no one else has. The choice is entirely yours." Karoline took a deep breath and walked back to the group. "We're going to tell them everything," she announced. "The safety violations, the political donations, all of it. We're going to be completely transparent about what happened and why." The room erupted in protests and warnings about political suicide. But Karoline felt strangely calm. For the first time in her career, she knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. 3 months later, as Luna had predicted, Karoline found herself more influential than ever. trusted by the public in ways that transformed how government communication worked. And in a small cafe in Boston, a teenage girl smiled as she read news articles about the lasting changes that had emerged from one person's decision to choose truth over safety.